communication resources, and faster and more reliable
technology.
Higher performance communication resources, and faster and more reliable.
My name is Teja. I work for a startup in the Bay Area called Sky High Networks. I have a penetration testing background originally, and then I moved in-house to be a security engineer, doing both pen testing for internal apps and also running application scanners, running the security program for my company.
Hi, my name is Yash. I was a consultant as well. Now I work for Box, where I do application security stuff, which ranges from a wide range of things, from scanning, penetration testing, and everything that has to do with our application.
So before I actually get into the talk, I'm just curious, how many of you guys run a scanner internally within your company or for clients just doing some sort of pen testing engagements? Okay, quite a few. So I assumed like a lot of people here would be interested in deploying a scanner in some manner, either be it from a client perspective or internally. We personally have had experiences, trying to evaluate scanners and deploy them internally and scale these deployments, and we learned a lot of lessons. The primary thing, though, is we thought, what are the questions that one needs to ask before choosing a scanner? So the whole point of this talk is to help you ask the right questions and provide some examples of situations you might face before deploying, when you deploy a scanner, and a few useful tweaks that you can make to make your lives easier, because scanners are not really reliable. Sometimes they crash. You kick off a scanner and go away for 2 days, and you come back to see it was stuck like an hour later. So just things to watch out for, some tweaks, and what this talk is not about is not an evaluation of all the scanners out there. We did not do any objective evaluation of every single scanner, the scan coverage or the scan performance or false positives. It's definitely not a recommendation of this is the scanner you want, because we want you to ask the right questions for yourself, and we hope that we cover about 80% of the questions everybody needs to ask, and choose the right scanner for you. And also, it's not a cost-benefit analysis. I know there's some very good free open source scanners, but also some which are like $40,000 a year. And definitely not any endorsement to any particular scanner. So let's get right into it. Before even getting to what scanner you want to use, I would think you want to know what your application footprint is like in your company. That is, what are the objectives you want to achieve when using an application security scanner? Do you want to just find vulnerabilities and fix them? I would think so, but there's different motivations in different cases. Some cases, the scanners are purely compliance-driven. Somebody wants a report, and they use scanners, which is understandable. Ideally, as a security guy, I want everybody to fix all vulnerabilities, but risk management is also a thing, right? And then sometimes your customers want you to, produce some sort of scan report or vulnerability report. And then the other question to ask is, how many applications do you have in your org? And how many do you have only internal apps, or do you have a main product which is actually a web app? And how are you planning to use the scanner? Do you have dedicated security engineers running these scanners, doing triaging, eliminating false positives and handing over these to engineers, or do you have an engineer actually running the scanner for you, and who owns the whole execution process?
So the first thing you need to ask is, what's your deployment model? Is your application locally hosted? Is it on the cloud? Do you have multiple environments, like a staging, a dev, a production? Where do you want to scan stuff? Can these environments talk to each other? Can they talk to the internet? If they can talk to the internet, then you might as well go for a cloud-based scanner. But the different things you need to consider when comparing cloud-based to locally hosted scanners. Cloud-based scanners are more like point and shoot. Give it a starting URL, give it a set of credentials to authenticate with, and then say shoot. it goes, scans, gives you back a result. But with locally hosted scanners, you have many things you can customize. You can potentially integrate it within your SSDLC program in a much better way. Once you decide where to host the scanner, or between a cloud-based and a locally hosted scanner, you need to look at authentication, how the scanner would be authenticating to your application. You would have multiple applications, right? A web app, a set of APIs, a mobile application, or even multiple mobile applications, and they all use different models of authentication. Some may use tokens, cookies, HTTP basic auth, and whatnot. So before choosing a scanner, you need to make sure that that scanner can support all the forms of authentication your multiple different apps have. I mean, if it cannot authenticate to one of your apps, what good is an unauthenticated scan going to do, right? So once you make sure that the scanner can authenticate into your application, you need to make sure that it stays authenticated. There are many cases when scanners log in and then they do something which logs them out within like 5-10 minutes, and then the rest of the 24-hour scan it does is unauthenticated. That's not of much value. Many scanners have regex-based pattern matching. You need to figure out if the pattern matching the scanner has actually applies to your application, and it actually stays logged in. If the scanner detects a logout, it needs to be able to log back into your application and continue the scan. Another thing you might want to see is how many times does it log back in. I've seen some scanners that do not have a good session detection mechanism, and to avoid problems because of that, they just keep sending login requests like once every 5 seconds. This actually happened to me when I was doing an eval of different scanners. For one of them, I had like 35,000 or 40,000 concurrent sessions live on the test environment, and guess what? The DB crashed. So you need to make sure that does not happen on production.
Yeah, and also, after I evaluated a few scanners, I realized that the scanner I was running did not support WebSockets, which was a functionality that our application used. So it might be a good idea for you to check what protocols your application uses. Application layer protocols like SPDY, which is one of Google's, or WebRTC, which is usually used for video or audio. And similarly, input formats. There are so many different input formats, JSON, XML, GWT. You might want to just check what your app uses. Not all scanners are good at fuzzing, all protocols or all input formats. I've seen some scanners which are pretty bad at JSON, or GWT is not even supported by many scanners, but it's still one of the input formats used out there. Similarly, custom test cases. So I've seen several scanners struggle with SSO or SAML-based flows because whenever there are flows which involve dynamically changing parameters that are not just in your HTTP request headers or body, HTTP request URL or body, and there's additional parameters that change in the headers. A lot of scanners don't, detect these changes and follow the flow. So if you can customize your scanner to follow a specific flow, if you can have it act as a proxy and then specify which parameters to track, that'll help you continue the automated scan in a lot of different cases. Similarly, web services. I'm not really a huge fan of any scanner really that does a really good job of just taking the web services WSDL file and does a great job of scanning, but there are a few different ones which at least can take a WSDL file and start scan automatically. So some things to watch out for.
One important thing you need to look at when evaluating scanners is crawling. If the scanner is not able to crawl your whole website, how is it going to scan? How is it going to find vulnerabilities, right? Because it does not have the whole surface area itself. When you're looking at the crawl engine of a particular scanner, there are multiple things you need to look at. These things would help you a lot, and some of these things you might want to look at are Does it allow a user to specify the starting URL? I mean, you might not want to start the scan at the home page, but you might want to start it at the login page where the scanner would authenticate and then move on. Does it let you do that? Does the scanner support addition or removal of other domains or subdomains or some specific links you might or might not want to crawl or scan? One important feature you might want to see for is manual crawl. And by manual crawl, I mean the user doing a crawl using a browser and then the scanner listening as a proxy and then recording the whole crawl. Once you're done with the manual crawl, that would be the whole map, application map that the scanner takes and does the scanning part of it. So one thing I would highly suggest is when you do like comparison of different scanners, do not just look at the end results of how many vulnerabilities did scanner A find and how many did scanner B find. You would want to look at the crawl results and make sure that the scanners are finding the same number of unique URLs. There are cases when a scanner would find the same URL again in a different format, and it would mark it as a different URL. So you might want to watch out for duplication of URLs as well. Next is the scan engine. Scan engine is, well, it's the bread and butter of the whole scanner system, right? I mean, that's what you buy it for scanning stuff. There's a lot of research that has happened on the various scan engines being used, so we're not going to go in depth of how different scan engines work and which one is better, which one is not. We provide resources at the end. You could look up the research. But there are some things which you might want to look at. For example, say your application is returning a JSON blob, and that contains a cross-site scripting payload. But the response correctly specifies that the content type is application/JSON. Does the scanner look at the content type before specifying or before it actually flags that response as a vulnerability, specifying that that particular response is vulnerable to a cross-site scripting attack? These things would actually save a lot of time because these are a whole bunch of false positives. You would not have to look and evaluate each of them manually. Another good example I have, which actually a very low-cost scanner does this. So for remote code execution testing, what the scanner does is it has an external server, and the RCE payloads that it sends to your application, if correctly executed, send a ping to this external server. And then the scanner talks to the server and then confirms that the ping has been received, and then it actually flags the vulnerability. This way, it's quite certain that it's an actual bug and not a false positive. So we have covered scanning, scanners, how they log in, how they stay logged in, the crawl engine, the actual scan engine as well. So state management is next. So by state management, what I mean is how the scanner actually stores the state of the manually triaged vulnerabilities. So by that, what I mean is when an engineer or you in your company opens the scanner up, opens up a scan, and then marks some of them as false positive or fixed or like risk accepted. Is this state reflected among different scans? Is this reflected among different profiles of scans? As in, you might have a light scan, you might have a profile for complete invasive scan. Something marked as false positive within an invasive scan should also reflect among the other scan profiles you have. Again, another thing you might want to look for is, does the scanner let you mark a set of vulnerabilities as not applicable to a scan profile? For example, say you're scanning your APIs, and the APIs use token-based authentication. So these API calls would not be vulnerable to CSRF attacks, right? Because they do not use cookies. So in that scan profile, can you mark CSRF as non-applicable to the whole scan? That feature would actually save you a lot of time, because once you mark these things as not applicable to the whole scan itself, you would not have to look at false positives.
Similarly, there are additional bonus features, like Yash mentioned, everything about authentication or session management. Those are, I would say, must-have features, but there can be additional features that you are interested in, and compliance checks, I would regard them as one of those bonus features. Compliance standards usually are not very prescriptive, right? They just say you have to follow the basic security principles like least privilege. But you yourself, in your policies that you define to comply with those standards, say, hey, we want a 15-minute lockout or account lockout or session timeout or a specific password complexity requirement. So we've come across scanners where we could configure those checks, and the scanner can also help us stay compliant if you're trying to scale your scanner in a large organization with 50 applications. It would be nice to have a scanner just check these things and tell you when you're out of compliance instead of wait for an auditor to show up. Similarly, other features that we have seen in scanners and we thought were really useful are scan throttle support. A lot of scanners support this, but we've also had our applications, our QA environment crash because some of the scanners didn't support throttling or request timeouts. And report format support also. I guess this is more important for consultants if you can actually customize things. But also in-house, we have used scanners where we could actually put in snippets for remediation guidance. For example, if you internally have a library to fix cross-site scripting and you just need to make this method call, then you add that particular snippet that says use this library in the report, and every single time you have cross-site scripting, you have that. So how much can you really customize your report? Upstream proxy support is a huge one. I have personally used this so many times because I use one scanner and I'm trying to scan and it's continuously logging out or it's just stopping and it says session not detected. What do? I chain another proxy. I see what the scanner is sending out, so I use like some free proxy, Charles, Burp, whatever you want, and look at what that scanner is sending and where it's struggling to stay logged in, and then I do match and replace at a place just to make it work. So just a tiny hack, but it has saved me a lot of times, just a lot of time. And custom checks like Selenium scripts or any sort of scripting ability within your scanner has been a huge help. Similarly, if you can define environments, for example, if you can tell your scanner that this is your dev environment, this is your staging environment, and then configure it accordingly, that will also save you a lot of time.
So automation. Who here does not love automation? So in security, everything needs to be automated as much as possible, right? We want to reduce as much manual work as we can. So when you come to automation with scanners, it's more of a financial manpower-related decision. All the features listed here, you would get them in an enterprise-level license, but that would cost way more than a basic license with the same scan and crawl engines. So it's, again, a very different question for each enterprise. If you have a big enough budget, you could go for the enterprise version, but if your budget is limited, you would want to go for a basic version. And most of these can actually be scripted out based on the command line capabilities of the scanner. So if you're low on budget, you might want to look for a scanner which has very good command line interface capabilities and good API support so that you could spend like a week or two and automate most of these things. But in general, even if you automate or you want to buy these things, some things you want to look for with the scanners are, does it have Jira integration? That means, can it file tickets automatically? And once the ticket is closed, can it automatically save the state in the scanner? Single sign-on integration. Can it integrate with your single sign-on so that you do not have to worry about authentication and authorization for specific group of users in your organization? Can you schedule different scans at different times and have them automatically kick off? Do you have like a time limit? Say you want to run the scan only during the weekends. So can you have a automation rule which says start on a Friday night and end by Sunday night? Does it give out email notifications? You might want email notifications when a scan starts, stops, or when there is like a high critical or a blocker issue found. Those are some questions you might want to ask before you choose which sort of automation features you want. These are some useful tweaks which we have noticed during our whole play session with scanners that we had in our respective organizations. So one thing we would suggest is to just blacklist all logout pages when you're evaluating them, because you do not know how good their session management engine is. And then it's more of a precautionary measure, right? You don't want to knowingly make the scanner log out during the scan. Then the session management mechanism itself, I would say spend some time on it, build a good regex which covers all the different scenarios. So usually scanners have like logged in or logged out regex, as in a regex matching a pattern which would show only in logged in pages, or something which would show only on logged out pages. So make sure that the regex you have covers all the edge cases you might have in your application. Use a single thread once in a while. Using a single thread, yes, I agree it's painfully long, but it would cover more surface area than multi-threaded crawling. And then coming to custom flows, there are some flows which might use different protocols. It might be like a mashup of things which the crawler might not be intelligent enough to crawl through. So you might want to do a custom flow-based scan, just record multiple sessions, multiple flows for different things, and then just integrate it with the scanner. Defining custom 404 pages. That's actually really important, because for scanners, only a status code which says 400 something is an error page, but your application might be sending out 200 pages with an error message in the body. So if you do not define custom pages, some things that can happen is, say for example, the scanner tries a CSRF attack, and it gets back a 200 OK with the body saying there was an error with the token. But that would not make sense to the scanner. It would just see the 200 message and then think the attack executed, and it would list it as a vulnerability. So if you have custom 404 pages, that would mitigate a lot of false positives. Then you would want to have logs in your system, right? These are attacks against production or development, and things might break once in a while. What I've noticed is having a custom user agent is very easy to enable, or a custom header, and those are very easy to parse through in logs and make sure what the point of failure was. And again, using a proxy, as Teja mentioned, is a very good debugging methodology which we have followed time and again. But again, with proxies behind heavy scanners, there is a chance they might crash. So just watch out for that. These are some things we have noticed go wrong terribly. Multiple concurrent sessions. So if the session detection mechanism is not good enough, as I mentioned before, you might have multiple sessions, which is not a good thing, because that would put a lot of load on your database. Again, your application might behave differently to, say, 100 or 200 concurrent sessions at the same time. Then rate limiters. Rate limiters are very useful when used for abuse prevention purposes. Most of the applications have rate limiters, right? You have different kinds of rate limiters. You might have rate limiters by IP, by username. And things, how they can go wrong is, say, for example, you kick off a scan before going home, and then the next morning you come open the scan, and then like, you got rate limited by IP, and guess what? Your whole company is rate limited at this point. those are some things you might want to watch out for. Account logout is one, account logouts. So most of the applications would have a CAPTCHA which might be applied after 3 or 5 wrong attempts at login. So, and once they're logged out, it's a manual thing, right? You need a CAPTCHA. The scanner cannot do that. Some scanners, I've noticed, do have an option where you can set the number of bad attempts before which the application logs the user out, and then the scanner would not do more than that X number of bad attempts before it actually gives in the correct password.
Yes, a few other issues. I'm not sure if you guys have played a lot, but with scanners, but Burp Suite, for example, has a command line argument where you can change the amount of memory it uses. Similarly, there's a lot of other commercial and open source scanners too. Sometimes they are actually options in your settings. Sometimes you just have to use some command line options. But definitely be aware of memory issues. If you especially are running scans that run for days, you might want to just check that you have allocated sufficient memory to your scanner. Similarly, turn off all notifications in your app. This can be really dangerous because you can flood everybody in your organization with a lot of emails, depending on what sort of notifications you have configured. Data destruction is one classic thing. SQL injections can drop a database, even though if you're testing in your QA environment, dev environment, there are still people doing manual testing there, so you don't want to completely destroy environments. Another thing is disk space constraints. Just be careful of how much disk space your scan is occupying. I've seen scans crash just because I haven't checked before that I have enough disk space for the scanner to run. So basically, I guess last 3 slides are things that we have run into while running scanners, and we have had hours of productivity lost because the scanner stopped in the middle of the night for some reason, logged out, couldn't log in because the account got locked out, or it didn't have enough memory allocated, or I had some drop statement, or the scanner ran some drop statement which basically dropped the whole database. So that's basically it. We this set of useful resources. So there's a couple of websites that or papers that we have referred to before to look at scanner comparison. There's one called SecTools Market, which is the first URL there, which actually compares different scanners, and another paper which I believe was presented a couple of years ago. This is actually a comparison between different types of scanners. Some of the information is there is outdated, but most of it is pretty decent. That is actually all we have. Sure. Yeah, we have uploaded our talk at that URL and cloud.box.com too, so if you want to take a look, you're welcome to.